Our last unit of new information starts today with complex numbers. As promised, we will look at a few things with complex numbers. I'm going to start pretty basic and work to a little less basic, but I think everything is going to be relatively straightforward and pretty easy. We'll start with a couple of definitions. The imaginary unit, which we will denote by the letter I for imaginary, is the number whose square is -1. So I squared is -1, or I is the square root of -1. A complex number is simply a number in the form a plus bi, where a is called the real number part and b is called the imaginary part. When we add complex numbers, if we take a complex number a plus bi and add another complex number c plus di, we're going to add the real number parts. So we'll take a plus c, and then we'll add the imaginary parts. So we would have a plus c plus the quantity b plus d with an I with it. And I think when we see some examples, this will be pretty straightforward. We could also subtract complex numbers. So when we subtract complex numbers, if we have a plus bi minus c plus di, we subtract the real number parts, a minus c, and we subtract the imaginary parts, b minus d, all times I. So here's what this will look like. Adding and subtracting complex numbers. We have 3 plus 5i plus -2 plus 3i. 6 plus 4i minus 3 plus 6i. 5 plus 3i plus 6 minus 4i. And 3 plus I minus 7 minus 2i. So according to our definition, adding, we're going to take the real number part and add them together. Now, in this case, we're adding a negative, so we can just write it as subtraction. And then we'll take the imaginary parts and add them together, and that will have an I with it. So we have 3 minus 2, which is 1, plus 5 plus 3, which is 8, I. Our second example is subtraction, so here we're going to take the real number parts and subtract them. 6 minus 3 plus the imaginary parts, 4 minus 6, and that's going to have an I with it. 6 minus 3 is 3. 4 minus 6 is -2 with an I. Normally, we won't write 3 plus negative 2i. We'll just write it as 3 minus 2i. Our next example, 5 plus 3i plus 6 minus 4i. So again, we're adding the real number part. We're adding the imaginary part. Now in this case it's 3 plus negative 4, or 3 minus 4. 5 plus 6 is 11. 3 minus 4 is negative 1. Again, I would write that as minus 1i, or you will often see it without the 1. Either of those last two are correct. And finally, we have 3 plus I minus 7 minus 2i. So, again, subtract the real number part. Subtract the imaginary part. That I is just like 1i. I always like to change subtraction of a negative to adding a positive. And then I'll finish off the problem. 3 minus 7, negative 4. 1 plus 2 is 3i. And that's it. Your assignment will be in Schoology. It will be called Adding and Subtracting Complex Numbers. And it'll be right in the folder with the notes. Have a terrific day.